I'm interested in what I see is a shift, and I'm certainly not convinced that you're going to agree with this, but in post-COVID, there was a massive rush to adopt some zero trust philosophies, largely around remote access, where it was critical to understand the identity of the person getting access to the network, given all of the remote challenges that we faced. And I had a conversation with one of our customers, and the word microsegmentation came up. And what I found so interesting was that they had compartmentalized zero trust into two different buckets. One that was user identity, maybe around SASE or something like that, very much user identity basis. And then one that they didn't call zero trust, they called microsegmentation, that had a lot to do with what I'll call machine identity. Have you seen that split, that divergence, where zero trust, as you say, isn't a single product, but the industry has started to embrace it as different solutions depending on the identity of the...
Well, that's been a marketing thing. So the first people who jumped on the bandwagon were the identity people, and they said identity equals zero trust, and identity is the new perimeter. And I say no, identity is consumed in policy in zero trust, right? Mm-hmm. And microsegmentation is a technology that you use. In fact, the second report I ever wrote was called Build Security into Your Network's DNA, introducing the zero trust network architecture. That was November of 2010. And I said in that report, new ways of segmenting networks must be created because all modern networks must be segmented by default. You know, I had been doing voice over IP hacking. I'd been doing essentially lateral movement, you know, hopping VLANs, and I could see that there was no way that traditional network topologies could handle that without new ways of developing segmentation. Mm-hmm. So segmentation I always think of as the foundation, and then I use the identity to control, you know, as one of the statements in a policy statement. So in Zero Trust we have what's called a Kipling method policy, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. Rudyard Kipling created that, so I call it a Kipling method statement. Who should have access via what application? Who, what, when should that be done? And it shouldn't be on 24 hours a day, right? It should be on when those people are working, because that rule might be used by an attacker when your people are home asleep. Who, what, when, where is the location of what we call the protect surface, the thing I have to protect. That's the fundamental question we ask at Zero Trust. What are you trying to protect? Why are we doing this, right? That's all your compliance mandates. That's where we throw a lot of metadata in that we're going to analyze later on. And then how do we validate that packet to make sure, or that flow, to make sure that it's acceptable? And then if all those things are true, then we allow it. So Zero Trust is a set of granular allow rules. I very rarely have to write a deny rule. And so it comes down to policy. And so in the COVID era, right, we saw a lot of these transport mechanisms that ZTNA is, which is rebranded SSL VPN, right? And they don't have policy inside the tunnel. Yeah. And so, yeah, you can have an identity, but I would argue that all identities are machine identities, right? And they're asserted that when I'm on my machine is sending out a packet that is asserted to come from me, but it may or may not have come from me, right? So we don't know. I mean, it's all machines. There are no people on the network, right? But we keep trying to anthropomorphize it and say John is on the network or Jody's on the network. Neither one of us have ever been on a network, right? We've never shrunken down into a subatomic particle and been transferred over the Wi-Fi to the Zoom server, you know. Yeah. It doesn't happen that way. So when you understand how the systems work, you can understand that a little bit better. And that's actually going to be one of the problems in the future, is I talk to a lot of people who don't understand how the basic underlying infrastructure works.